quorum be dispensed with?
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to join my colleague and friend, the Senator from Delaware, Chris Coons, in introducing legislation that will make voting faster and more accessible to all voters. Here we are barely a week after a historic election in 2012. And I can't speak about North Carolina, but in Virginia, it's remarkable. In 2012, people had to wait for hours in line to vote. In Prince William County, folks waited for up to 3 hours. In Chesapeake, Virginia, folks waited up to 4 hours. It was remarkable that it was 5 days after the fact before we even knew the results in Florida. 21st century, in the greatest democracy in the world, voting shouldn't be this much of a burden. And in many ways, when you have those kind of extraordinary lines, particularly if you're working, what we in effect have created is a 21st century poll tax. And those of us in the South who have a history where poll taxes were used to restrict voters, what you in effect have by having these extensive lines, if you work on an hourly basis or can only get off a bit of time, and you can't afford to wait 3 and 4 and 5 hours in line to vote. This legislation, the Fair, Accurate, Secure, and Timely Voting Act of 2012, the so-called FAST Act, creates a competitive grant program to encourage states to aggressively pursue election reforms. It would provide incentives for states like Virginia to invest in practices and technology designed to expedite voting at the polls and simplify voter registration. The FAST Voting Act addresses this issue in a responsible way. It doesn't add new mandates. It authorizes simply additional resources for those states which step up with common sense reforms to make voting faster and more accessible to voters. This is a relatively very small program, but a few dollars spent to both increase the process, increase the number of voting machines at those polling places that are so restricted, would, I believe, remove some of the embarrassment that Virginia and so many other states saw last week when people had to wait so long. I encourage Virginia's elected leaders to embrace this opportunity to improve access for Virginia voters who should not have to wait in line for hours to exercise their most basic constitutional right, the right to vote. As I mentioned, this bill authorizes a federal program that would award grants based on how well applicant states, again, states will be the decision makers whether they'd want to apply for this program, are able to improve access to the polls in at least 9 specific ways. Let me just simply mention 3 of those. For one, provide absentee voting, including no excuse absentee voting. We in Virginia still have restrictions on pre-vote. 2, providing assistance to voters who do not speak English as a primary language. Virginia, North Carolina, other states are becoming more diverse, and we need to accommodate those voters. And then auditing and reducing waiting time at polling stations. Again, no one in the 21st century should have to wait 4 or 5, and as some reported cases in Florida, up to 7 or 8 hours to vote. This program, this, again, voluntary grant program, also requires the establishment of performance measures and reporting requirements to ensure a state's progress in eliminating statutory, regulatory, procedural, and other barriers to expedited voting and accessible voter registration. This is a relatively small bill. I want to commend, though, my colleague, the senator from Delaware, Senator Coons, for taking the lead. I join him as a co-sponsor on this. And regardless on which side of the aisle you stand, in 2012 and surely before 2016, we ought to not have a repeat of this 21st century poll tax that is imposed on folks all across America by not being able to exercise their vote or have to pay too high a price, or have the kind of embarrassment where it takes us literally days and days for the public to get the results. Madam President, I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this legislation. And with that,
the senator from Vermont.
Madam President,